This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Coronial. I'm Georgie.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Alice.
Today I'm going to be discussing the death of Sean Lawrence Guy Edwards, who was a 26-year-old professional racing car driver at the time of his death. On the day of his death, Mr. Lawrence had been contracted to provide instruction in motor racing to two individuals at the Queensland Raceway. He had travelled all the way from Monaco, his usual place of residence, to provide this service.
Oh, wow. So was he Australian but lived in Monaco, or...?
No, so it doesn't actually say, it just says that he was born in the UK, but resided in Monaco, and he was a professional race car driver.
Yeah, okay.
I think his father, Guy Edwards, maybe, is a well-known race car, Formula One driver.
Sure.
Yeah. I don't know enough about racing.
No.
So he was contracted to provide driving demonstration and instruction from the passenger seat over a 2-day period to two individuals that were actually brothers.
Okay.
As I mentioned, it occurred at the Willowbank Raceway, which is a circuit in Queensland. This raceway had been hired in a private capacity by a company owned by the father of the individuals that were receiving the driving instruction.
Oh, interesting. So was it a session just for those two?
Yeah, sounds like it. And so it sounds like they were race car driver brothers. The father owned the company that was like the racing organisational company. That
they were racing underneath.
Yeah, under. And so he hired the driver to instruct them. So not only to give demonstration, but also to then sit with them as they were driving to give them instruction.
Give them feedback. And it's not like they were two completely new people off the street.
No, they were amateur race car drivers.
Cool.
Yeah.
Gosh, but that would have been an expensive exercise, though.
Oh, I imagine. But my understanding is to be in the racing industry, you need money.
Yes, you really
I would
do.
assume so.
Yeah. So it is an expensive industry. Mm-hmm. Of note, this company always ensures the attendance of a paramedic and ambulance when hiring the use of a motorway, despite it not being a requirement of the motorway.
Okay.
Oh, that's
and
good.
that made me so happy that when they were doing a high-risk activity, they attempted to mitigate risk.
Yep.
But also I wonder how much that costs as well.
Also that. Where do you get a paramedic and ambulance? Like, can you just go to QAS and be like...
Is it not a private?
I think you can.
Oh, can you?
Because like they do
a
it for
private
like
service.
rodeos and things like that.
So you must be able to. But it was a company and you could class it as an event.
Yep.
Albeit small.
Yeah, I don't think you as an individual could necessarily hire them, but yeah, a business probably could, for a specific event.
Yeah. I'd just like you to follow me around today.
Just in case.
I'm feeling like I'm going to have one of those days, so if you could just follow me around.
That would be ideal.
I would really appreciate it.
So a little bit about the racetrack. The Willowbank circuit is a 3.1 kilometre track, which is nationally recognised as a motor racing track.
Whereabouts is it, aside from being in Queensland?
In Willowbank.
Where is that?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Towards Ipswich.
Oh, okay, so it's southeast Queensland.
The Confederation of Australian Motorsport, CAMS, had licensed the track for racing, which meant that CAMS understood the level of risk of using the track to be considered acceptable. Take that how you wish. Given the car racing is a dangerous sport, all participants at Willowbank were also required to sign a disclaimer in terms of risk of injury and death before heading out onto the track.
Yep.
Yeah, that's pretty standard.
Seems pretty standard, yeah. So during the day of the instruction, the morning of the 15th of October 2013, Mr. Edwards was providing driving instruction from the passenger seat, so the right front-hand seat, because it was a 2004 left-hand drive Porsche.
Gotcha.
Okay.
996 GT3, which I'll refer to as the GT3 or the Porsche. This vehicle had been purchased by the company who hired the track in 2011, so 2 years prior to the accident happening.
And it wasn't something that they had just sort of hired for the day and they'd never driven it before. Like they had driven it multiple times before.
They didn't actually mention whether this individual had driven it before, but given it was within the ownership of the company and that they were amateur race drivers, and it said that he had enough skill to know how to drive it. So
Yeah,
I feel like it's a safe
presumably-
assumption.
you know, get in one car, you can get in any other car, but I presume that he had enough experience that he would have known how to drive it.
Yeah.
So this vehicle was specifically built for racing and included a roll cage, a 6-point harness for the driver, a 4-point harness for the passenger, a factory fire system, and was not registerable for standard road use.
Yep.
Why is the harness for the passenger not the same as for the driver? You would think the risk would be.
No, I think it's
the
because
same.
often if you're like racing a car, you're not going to have any passengers.
Yeah,
You are
but
only going to have the driver.
if there is a passenger in there, wouldn't the risk?
I don't think a 6-point harness is that much more safe than a 4-point harness when
Right.
compared to a regular seatbelt.
But I also would
Okay.
assume that if you've got a passenger, you're not under like proper race conditions
Yeah,
generally
That's
as well.
yeah,
So
as
you're
well, yeah.
You're not going as quickly or as
I
pushing
would
it as hard.
assume that you therefore are at a slightly lower risk when you've got a passenger
That
to
makes
an extent.
Yeah.
Is this going to explain otherwise? Probably.
Well, I actually can't give you an answer for why there's a difference in them. Didn't seem like anyone had a particular issue with that.
Yeah. Okay.
I also didn't know that factory fire systems existed, but seems like you can get essentially a fire system that sprays water within your car.
Oh, cool.
Or,
I mean, makes
or
sense
something.
when
It
you
does
make
something to
sense,
help
yeah,
fire retard the vehicle should it be setting on fire, which I was like, oh, sure. And then you turn it on from your dash.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you activate it. Or can activate it, I guess. Interestingly, the engine was at the rear of the vehicle with the fuel tank located at the front. It's the other sort of difference to a standard car.
Although that is pretty standard for supercars and race cars and that sort of thing. So that you've got the weight at the back. Yeah.
Fair.
So, like, you know, your Ferraris and Lamborghinis and stuff.
I have that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair. Both the drivers were wearing helmets, with the driver in a full-face helmet, while Mr. Edwards was wearing a partly open-faced helmet to assist with instructing the driver. So I guess the assumption there being that it's easier to yell instruction with the face helmet open.
Yeah.
Mr. Edwards and the driver were completing clockwise laps of the track, and it was on their 13th lap when approaching the final turn, known as turn 6, at approximately 165 kilometres per hour that the vehicle left the track. It continued straight, unexpectedly left the track.
Yeah.
It wasn't meaning
It
to.
wasn't planned.
That was it was unplanned. It continued straight through a gravel trap and collided with a tyre safety barrier in front of a concrete wall.
Oof.
The vehicle caught on fire almost immediately. Remember the fuel tanks in the front,
Yep.
which also caused the tyre barrier to combust.
Yeah, tyres are pretty good at burning.
Yeah, that's my
once they're
understanding.
alight.
Assistant staff located trackside responded immediately and were able to drag the vehicle away from the fire and then extinguish the car. Following this, medical care was attempted. Unfortunately, Mr. Edwards was declared deceased at the scene, while the driver suffered significant injuries and was airlifted to a local hospital. He ultimately survived the accident and his injuries.
Yep. Did they go into what his injuries were, or whether he had any long-lasting
They
effects?
didn't. They just excused him from the inquest and providing any evidence in any way.
Yeah,
So
okay,
I
fair.
suspect that could suggest that there's ongoing issues,
Either
but also
physical or
not
mental.
wanting to bring up the
yeah.
trauma either. On autopsy, it was found that Mr. Edwards did not have any elevated blood carbon monoxide levels, which suggests he was not breathing at the time of the smoke from the fire reaching him.
Right.
And hence it was felt by the pathologist conducting the autopsy that he likely died on impact of the crash,
Yep.
which I think is actually like a small...
Yeah.
Small mercy.
Yeah. So because of this incident, there were a number of investigations completed by a number of different organisations to kind of establish what happened and how things could be improved. And this included various organisations such as the Queensland Police Service, which I'll refer to as QPS, Queensland Work Health and Safety, so WHS, CAMS, which I already mentioned was the Confederation of Australian Motorsport, and then the Raceway itself also conducted an investigation. Due to the differing opinions between the experts reviewing the accident, ultimately a decision was made to hold a coronial inquest to review all the evidence. Factors investigated at the inquest included the driver's experience and instruction, and the instruction provided by Mr. Edwards, the mechanical condition of the vehicle, the adequacy of the track, and then the licensing and safety requirements of the track. So in terms of driver experience and the instruction being provided, the driver of the vehicle was reasonably experienced but yet an amateur driver. and the training activity on the day did not take him beyond the capabilities or beyond his capabilities, and he was not driving recklessly. And that was thought and described by those involved.
So, like, that was something they could all agree on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that was because the training session, and hence also the crash, was recorded on a GoPro that was being used for instructional purposes.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So I assume they essentially had like a dash cam, but
Yep.
facing them. It might have been dual ways.
Yeah, possibly.
Also horrendous that you could then also watch the crash.
Yeah.
The footage of the driving and the crash were able to be reviewed by multiple of the inquest witnesses. One expert witness raised concerns about the possibility of driver fatigue, given the pair were on the 13th lap of their training session,
Yeah.
and that this to them seemed like quite a long training session.
Yeah,
They
okay.
gave the example that most people doing a training session like that would do like 3 or 4 laps, then
Oh,
pause.
okay.
Because it's pretty intense,
Yeah,
like motor
you've got to be
racing.
concentrating.
And so this expert did notice that there was evidence that the driver's skills leading up to the crash were declining, as
Yeah,
to be
okay.
expected when you
Yeah,
get
you're
that far
fatiguing.
in. Yeah. However, it was sort of felt that this was, again, within the expectations of the duration of the training, and it wasn't to an extent that actually was a contributor to the crash itself.
Yeah.
And this is because the footage showed that on the approach of the turn, he attempted to do what one would do at the turn, such as decelerate, but the car didn't slow when he attempted to press on the brakes.
Yep.
Following it not slowing, he then started to more frantically pump on the brake to slow the vehicle without any success.
God, that'd be terrifying.
Absolutely.
Especially going at that speed.
Yeah. And so the footage highlighted that the time between the vehicle approaching the corner and impacting the concrete wall was a matter of seconds.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, there was not a lot of time to have
Yeah, even
done
if you
anything.
had tried, you can't steer away from a wall that's right in front of you when you're not slowing down.
And it's one of those ones where, like, when I was looking at the picture in the inquest, if he had turned, it would have only caused hitting a wall sooner.
Yeah.
So, like, actually probably going straight was the better option. It gave you a little bit more distance, but
Yeah, and that way you've got the gravel trap to try and slow you down.
whereas, I don't know how much more of a gravel trap was across adjacent to the straight and stuff. Anyway, either way, it was mere seconds. There really
Yeah,
wasn't
right.
much they could do anyway. The vehicle had a black box. Didn't know they existed
Oh,
in
there you
cars.
go.
Which was also reviewed by QPS and confirmed the lack of deceleration in the lead up to the final turn, despite the footage showing that he was attempting to use the brake. Hence, from this footage and the inquest witnesses, the coroner concluded that neither the driver nor Mr. Edwards contributed to the crash through their driving or the instruction Mr. Edwards was providing.
Yep.
Okay.
In terms of the mechanical condition of the vehicle was, as I mentioned before, a 2004 left-hand drive Porsche 996 GT3. It had been purchased in 2011 by the father of the drivers undergoing the instruction. The car was fitted with multiple safety features to improve risks during accidents. It was also regularly maintained by a company called Action Tyres and More, who perform mechanical review and were specialised for mechanical review of race cars. Also, again, sounded like father owns the company that the drivers are racing under. He also owns the company that performs all the mechanical
Oh, okay.
servicing on all the cars,
Yep.
if that makes sense. And that hence that organisation is entirely for servicing of race cars.
Gotcha.
That's what
Yeah.
they do. So they're not, you don't just like pull your race car into your local Kmart Tire
Yeah,
Auto.
no.
Yeah. The car underwent mechanic inspection the day before the race, and during this service, the rear brake pads were replaced and the brake fluid was bled. No other issues were reported in the inquest from that service, so they didn't discuss any other parts of it.
Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that that part was done correctly, just that it was the only thing of note.
Relevant to the fact that they were like,
Having
he
issues
tried
with
to brake,
brakes.
he couldn't brake,
Yep.
he ran into a wall.
Cool.
During the inquest, the mechanic who did that inspection also mentioned that on the day of the crash, Mr. Edwards had reported that the brakes felt a bit soft, and so he repeated the bleeding of the brake fluid, which Mr. Edwards then reported had resolved the issue. So it seems like something was up with
Something
the brakes.
wasn't quite
Yeah.
right.
Although it obviously wasn't an immediate failure because they were on their 13th lap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they had literally just done this 12 times before
Yeah.
on this exact corner and
Yeah.
it would have been fine.
And it had been fine. And it's turn number 6, so there's
Yeah.
5 other corners as well.
Yep.
Yeah, they have to slow down at least 5 other times. Following the crash, the vehicle was reviewed by the QPS. Their investigator raised concerns as to the level of wear and tear on the front disc brakes. On review, he noted the rear brakes were in good condition, which you would expect given they were brand new, whereas the front disc brakes were worn to replacement levels. However, he stated he would expect this wear to result in progressive brake fade rather than a catastrophic immediate failure.
Yeah.
Additionally, he also conceded that he was unsure the part the fire would have played on the condition of these disc brakes at the time of his review. So if they were set alight, would that cause them to look worn?
Yeah, gotcha.
Unrelated to their actual condition at the time that they were driving. An independent expert who provided a report on behalf of the coroner felt that the worn brakes were unlikely to be the cause of the crash, as the vehicle was seen to be unable to decelerate rather than have a progressive loss of braking.
Yep.
Right.
Hence, they felt the cause could have been either as a result of the throttle butterfly being inadvertently jammed open, which would have caused a constant acceleration at the same time as the driver attempting to decelerate.
Yeah, so you can't brake when you're accelerating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or that the ABS system somehow became tripped on, which prevented adequate braking. However, the expert witness was not able to suggest what may have caused either of these to occur. Hence, the coroner accepted that the vehicle was well maintained with multiple safety features and underwent regular servicing from a company that was specialised in mechanic review of race cars. Yet also found that the condition of the front disc brakes likely should have been identified by the servicing mechanic prior to the crash, but this was ultimately not related to the cause of the crash. So in an unusual turn of events, the coroner, through the Office of the State Coroner, was contacted by email by a former police crash investigation officer who also happened to own 2 Porsche 996 GT3s.
Okay.
And he proposed a possible cause for the accident. This individual explained that they experienced an episode of their vehicle's throttle being locked on during a race, which on their investigation they thought was as a result of a split in the hose that links the air intake to the engine manifold. That's a thing, right?
That's a thing, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. It was further explained that this split would cause the intake hose to roll over on itself and hence lock the throttle on,
Yeah, okay.
hence causing this individual's lack of ability to decelerate.
Yeah.
Yep.
They didn't describe what they did to fix it, which is interesting.
You replace it? You replace that hose?
No,
If
no,
it's
no, no,
split?
no. But like, did they crash? You know, like, or were they just going at a
They
slower
may have
speed?
been going, yeah.
I was invested. I was like, yeah, but when yours got locked on, why are you still alive? Like,
Yeah, how did you get around it?
yeah, how did you fix it?
I had something similar with my old car, but it got the accelerator jammed.
Yeah.
And so I couldn't accelerate at all. It was the opposite.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Which is preferable.
It's a preferable way, but it's not great when you stop in the middle
No,
of the
it's-
road and you can't move.
Yeah, true.
So the split in the hose was described by this individual as so insignificant as to not be visible by the naked eye.
Oh, wow. That's
So-
a pretty big thing for something that, a defect that small, to cause
yeah. I
such a
presume
big issue.
it has to have been an underwater test of the hose or something like that,
Must
of the
have
air
been, yeah.
bubbles, yeah. When the coroner suggested this potential scenario to their expert witness, the one who initially believed the cause of the accident could not be determined, the expert acknowledged that this scenario could align with the observed events of the accident. So we have a potential maybe.
Yeah,
why.
it gives them another theory.
Yeah. So in terms of the adequacy of the track, so this is sort of more looking at were there other features of the track that could have at least prevented the accident from being fatal?
Yep.
Because, sure, we've found that we probably couldn't have done anything to actually stop the mechanical defect, but how do we then ensure their safety when they are running off of the track?
At 165 kilometres an hour.
Exactly. In terms of the track itself, a review was conducted by 2 experts on behalf of both the Raceway itself and Queensland Work Health and Safety. The evidence was kept specific to turn 6 and where the vehicle travelled beyond turn 6 during the accident. The area included a runoff area, the distance beyond the track where the vehicle travelled, a gravel trap which is designed to slow the motion of a vehicle which has left the track, and this is similar to the premise of the arrestor beds that we've previously described in episode 38 on the Southeastern Freeway episode. And then a tyre barrier, which is intended to attenuate energy from the moving vehicle prior to impacting the concrete wall.
Yeah.
The expert witness for the Raceway reported that the runoff length, tyre barrier and gravel trap at turn 6 all complied with the relevant CAMS and International Federation of Automobiles, FIA, guidelines for V8 supercars, and therefore would have been suitable for the GT3 events. Additionally, he found that technically the gravel bed was over and above what was required by CAMS guidelines. Of note, in terms of the gravel trap, this expert did not specifically review the area in person, but rather relied on extrapolated data from previous use of the trap, so when other cars had ended up in it,
Right.
and hence how it would have functioned during this accident. Which sounds a bit lazy to me.
Yeah, it
But
sounds
that's
like you
just
maybe
a
should have
personal
gone
opinion.
out there and actually had a look at it yourself. But, you know,
I don't know where they were. Maybe it was too far away.
yeah.
I don't know. I find it interesting if you're an expert witness providing evidence on something like a physical location that you wouldn't go
Yeah.
to the physical location. But anyway,
Yeah.
conversely, the Queensland Work Health and Safety witness noted a number of concerns as to the safety features of the track.
Interesting. How can you have such a range of opinions on this?
I will kind of get to that
Okay.
and explain, but basically interpretation of regulations.
Yeah. That old.
Yeah, that old chestnut. So the Raceway expert witness was like, technically we are compliant.
I hate that word technically.
The Work Health and Safety is like,
Technically
you
or
may
not.
think that, but are you safe?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
There is a difference between being compliant and being safe.
Yes.
You would hope that they would be the same thing, but
Then often not.
yeah.
So it was noted that the 2-row barrier being used by the Queensland Raceway was not best practice and that a 3-row barrier should have been used. When assessing the difference between these two barriers, the expert witness calculated that the 2-tyre barrier would attenuate less than a quarter of the energy able to be attenuated by an FAI recommended barrier using 3 tyres. Therefore, he suggested that the 3-row barrier would have increased Mr. Edwards' chances of survival. The expert witness for the Queensland Raceway contested this and stated it was unlikely to have altered the outcome. And just for completeness, these expert witnesses were equivalents in terms of like background and history and skills and whatever. Just, it seemed that were equivalent. Obviously, I only have the limited detail that was in the inquest, but yeah.
Seems like reasonable minds may differ in this respect, and that makes it hard to make a finding.
Absolutely. With regards to the gravel trap, the witness for Work Health and Safety felt the uncompacted depth of the gravel was less than recommended by CAMS and the FIA. Additionally, they felt the gravel contained a high proportion of angular stones than recommended, making it less likely to be able to arrest vehicles. I don't know enough about stones, but it sounds like it just wouldn't have like sunk in as much as if you had a better option, if that makes sense.
I don't know why angular stones would cause that, but I also don't know enough about stones.
I think it was something to do with if they're round stones,
Yeah,
they slip in
over
amongst
each other
themselves
better.
better.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that would make sense.
And so you can settle in there better than angular where they don't
slide on
compact
top
as
of each
much.
other. Yeah.
Yeah, if they're angular, they're essentially forming like a
They're interlocking,
wall.
yeah.
Structure rather than
Yeah.
sinking you in. And I guess this is why you would use sand as well in an arrestor bed. Similar
Yeah.
concept.
Get bogged down quicker.
Yeah. This was explored further at the inquest, and it was identified that Queensland Raceway did not have a formal schedule for measuring the depth or maintaining the gravel traps,
Oh, good.
but rather attended to them on an as-needed basis.
Sorry, if they're not regularly checking them, how can they fix them on an as-needed basis? Or is it just like every time someone goes into it, they're like,
Pretty
okay,
much.
now we need to refresh it?
It didn't explicitly state that, but I think that's kind of the impression I got was like, when they were used, we put them back to how they were before they were used.
Yeah, right.
Or if they had some free time, they're like, oh yeah, maybe we'll just
Top that up.
yeah, we got some free time, so we'll go check the SLJ.
Yep.
Furthermore, inconsistencies about how the gravel was to be raked were identified between staff. So even then, those who were maintaining it didn't actually have proper structure as to what they were meant to do to maintain it.
Yeah, right.
It was also identified that the groundsman was responsible for day-to-day raking of the gravel traps, which seems like an odd
It
thing
seems
to assign
like
to the groundsman.
not a groundsman job.
Exactly.
Like, yes, it involves a rake, but it's a piece of safety equipment in
Absolutely.
the end. Like,
Yep. And so not unsurprisingly, the groundsman was unaware of the depth at which the gravel was required to be maintained to or the aeration level that was required.
yeah, he's just told to go rake the gravel thingy.
Yeah.
So it does.
It seems like the coroner didn't particularly like the CEO of the Queensland Raceway. And so when the coroner asked this CEO to comment on the groundsman's lack of knowledge about this issue, the CEO replied along the lines of, why would he know? He's only a groundsman.
And the coroner's like, that's exactly my point.
Yeah, and the coroner's like, I'm going to write this down for this inquest so that everyone knows that you're not my favourite.
Yes.
The coroner preferenced the evidence of the Queensland Work Health and Safety witness with regards to the adequacy of the gravel traps. In terms of how the Raceway could remain compliant, it appeared that when CAMS provided updates to their guidelines, they therefore didn't actually provide any further information as to how such new treatments should be applied and didn't mandate that these things happened either as they updated their guidelines.
Right, so they're just like, we've updated our guidelines. You do with that what you will.
Yep. So hence, the Raceway was compliant when they were first licensed by CAMS and hence maintained being compliant beyond that.
Yeah, they weren't necessarily being updated or like their compliance wasn't being checked.
I don't
often
even know
enough.
about that. Like, CAMS were coming along and licensing them, but CAMS were like, well, you were compliant last time, and even if we've updated our guidelines, you were compliant last time, so therefore you're still compliant.
Yeah.
Which is why that first witness was like, we were compliant.
Yeah, right.
Again, there's a difference between we are technically compliant to we are safe for people to race around
Yes.
in a high-risk activity.
Yep.
Since the accident, the Raceway have made improvements to the track, including adding an additional tyre barrier and deepening the gravel trap. Referring back to the CEO the coroner didn't like, the coroner also felt it was prudent to mention that the CEO was unaware of the changes that were made to the gravel traps.
Oh, as in like they were unaware of the improvements that had been made to their own. Oh,
Yeah.
like I understand that they obviously weren't directly involved in it, but you think someone in the organisation would have told them.
Before they came to
Hey,
the inquest.
Yeah.
You're going to this inquest. We've done this really good thing. Tell them that.
Make sure you tell them that. But also, I think the CEO is meant to be on top of changes
You
that are
would
made
think
to
so,
things as well.
especially in these circumstances.
Yeah, there would be some sort of oversight of, okay,
Yeah.
this happened. How are we fixing it?
So it seems like the coroner informed him of the upgrades that had occurred.
I can only imagine the sass that would have happened. Or like just like the pointed looks in that inquest.
That's the thing, right? I'm like, every time there's what seems like a little bit of sass in the written inquest, I'm
would
like,
be
that must be so
heightened.
toned down.
Yeah.
That has to be
Yes.
so toned down
Yeah.
for public display. So I'm only imagining it would have been so much better.
would have been a bit of a smackdown.
It would have
for
been.
sure.
Okay, so licensing of the track. CAMS is a national body which provides motorsport vehicle licensing of the vehicles and the drivers.
Yep.
And the track certifications. Following the accident, CAMS completed their own investigation of the Raceway. From their report, they only looked at how to improve safety in motorsport rather than make any conclusions about the cause of the accident.
Right.
They did not identify any issues with the track condition. They did note that the loose gravel trap was on the shallower side. It was reported in the inquest that the Queensland Raceway had not been issued with a permanent CAMS track license since 2014. So this happened in 2013, and I couldn't really establish then what it meant as to whether the previous license was permanent. And then after this, CAMS was like, we're only going to give you event licenses, but not have you permanently licensed.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But essentially that's what it changed to, where they said,
Right.
cool, you come to us with a request for an event, and we'll consider whether to license you at that point.
Gotcha. Rather than just having a blanket license for
License.
anything you want to do.
On the track, yeah. So the coroner noted that in the two events that had occurred since the accident prior to this inquest occurring, that CAMS had mandated extra safety requirements in order to issue the license, including things such as extra tyre barriers at turn 6. Ultimately, the coroner concluded that CAMS issued licenses despite the track not meeting all of its safety guide recommendations. However, given the track was hired for a non-competitive use by a private organisation for which Mr. Edwards was conducting the session, it therefore didn't fall under the sanctioning of the CAMS licence anyway. Hence, this type of instructional driving fell under risk assessments applicable to workplaces and hence is pursuant to workplace health and safety legislation.
Okay.
I think that's a bit of a cop-out.
Absolutely. I was like, why did we just spend the whole time reading about CAMS if actually it's just work health and safety?
But also, like, the instructor has no control over the track layout or upkeep or any of that.
And you sit there and you go, it's licensed by CAMS, so I assume, assume
Yeah,
it's safe.
It meets the
CAMS licensing
obligations.
requirements.
Yeah.
Yeah. The coroner concluded that participants are likely to be relatively understanding of the risks involved in car racing
Yes.
However, concluded that this not mean the risk should not be managed by conducting appropriate risk assessments and ensuring participants are adequately informed of risk minimisation strategies specific to the track. So yeah, you can sign a disclaimer, but that means that you should be told all of the information, such as, whilst we're technically licensed, we haven't bothered with any upkeep since we got that license in the 90s.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's fair. If you,
I mean, I'm sure they're not going to say it that way,
No,
but that absolutely should be the information that is
Yeah.
provided to people if they're not meeting the safety regulation. CAM's position on this was that a license does not guarantee the venue is safe, but provides an indication that when an event is held at the track under the risk management system of CAMS, that CAMS considers it meets a level of risk that's considered to be acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
That term, acceptable when I'm racing a car, is questionable.
And I sort of feel like as a driver, if you're accepting the risk, you're more accepting the risk that you will make a mistake. You know what I mean? Like either yourself or the car, something will happen.
The owner of the raceway is not liable for your
Correct.
mistake because you are participating in the high-risk activity itself. I agree. But there is a point of you're signing the waiver to say also that you're accepting that it's a high-risk activity occurring on their grounds. And I don't know, again, I still think that there's an onus on them to then give you enough information to know whether you wish to participate or not.
Yeah. Because you would assume going to that track, the assumption would be made that because they're CAMS licensed, they were adequately.
Yeah, the safety was appropriate.
Yeah.
So the final conclusions drawn by the coroner was that Mr. Edwards and the vehicle's driver were following adequate safety measures and suitably experienced, but the final turn of the track was not designed in such a way that would arrest a vehicle travelling at high speed on the approach to that turn in an event of a total brake failure. However, it is noted that when tracks are designed for car racing, the FIA, the International Federation of Automobiles, assume full effective braking when developing their models for how to arrest vehicles should they come off the track.
Right.
Because majority of the time it's driver error, missing the turn rather than mechanical error that causes a high-speed vehicle to fly off at full speed.
Yep.
And so that was sort of discussed around, well, there's really no way you can actually design a racetrack to assume and attend the energy of a 165-kilometre-hour vehicle coming off the track. Like, that is difficult to mitigate.
But you can increase your current safety measures so that it would help.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no design strategy, though, that's going to be
100%.
perfect in that outcome. The coroner felt that signing of some form of disclaimer should not remove the need for the track owner to inform participants of assessed risk and if these have been managed. Additionally,
Absolutely.
Great. Additionally, if a track is to be licensed by a body such as CAMS, then there should be risk assessments performed either by CAMS officials or other independent qualified persons. As I said, it just sounds like they continued to license them because they'd been licensed before.
Mm-hmm.
Hence, the coroner recommended that an appropriate motorsport regulatory body, such as CAMS or could be a similar organisation, and that multiple should work together to develop guidelines for driver coaching and recreational activities conducted on racetracks in Queensland, and ensure that these include appropriately informing those about the risks involved and how to make activities as safe as possible. So this could include things such as activity descriptions, insurance, numbers of officials, site visitors, control of circuit, qualifications of drivers and observers, licenses and driving age, track density, vehicle speed, passengers in vehicles, driver briefing and induction, vehicle and driver safety, and the apparel worn by drivers and passengers to ensure that they are all compliant with various standards. And additionally, the coroner sort of stated in that potentially they could consider including something around a digital or radio communication system to prevent the need for the passenger or the person giving instruction to have the less safe helmet.
Oh, yeah. And I feel like that's something that probably would have improved
Yeah.
with time and technology.
Yeah. Additionally, the coroner stated that information about this incident should be provided to Porsche, if it hadn't already been provided, so that the company could satisfy itself as to whether this was a one-off incident or whether there may be a design or manufacturing fault with the particular vehicle. So that was the coroner's recommendations. There really weren't that many, but I just found it really interesting that there are lots of caveats in this one that kind of technically made it not something that therefore mandated recommendations, I guess.
There were a lot of technicalities in it.
Yeah. Also, the father, technically the owner of the company, which we know was the father of the individuals driving, for the day also purchased insurance, including loss of income, death, and public liability insurance. I assume that that's just a, like, every time standard thing, especially with the fact that they also always had paramedics and stuff on board.
They were covering all their bases as a normal thing that they would do.
But then how bad that can come across. Like, it had a random mechanical failure that you can't prove and sent a son and another individual into a wall. And I was like, oh, that could come across poorly.
Yeah.
And so I wondered whether they actually looked into that, whether there was any investigation into
whether that was standard practice as well.
Or like risk of him benefiting significantly and that kind of stuff. And I'm not to say that there was any indication of that. It's just where my mind went.
Yeah, because I feel like even though he's purchased the insurance, the people who are injured or affected by it would be the ones who would get the payout.
It depends on how the clause is written.
Yeah, unless in case of a death, sometimes the payout goes
to that next of kin. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, in this case, the person who passed away wasn't the next of kin of the person who took out the insurance, but if it was his son that passed away, then it'd be even more.
That's what I was thinking. I was like, if the son had been the intended victim, if you, like, putting it in the spin of, like, could there have been a motive, which we absolutely don't think there was. I just found it really interesting that the coroner mentioned
that they had done that.
Yeah, the insurance that had been purchased. That was me just, like, spinning down more of a crime rabbit hole. Rather than how things can go wrong. But yeah.
Thanks very much. That was interesting.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. See you next time.
Bye.